"Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the legendary Clint Eastwood," she announced as the studio audience erupted in applause. Eastwood nodded politely as he settled into his chair, his weathered hands resting calmly on the armrests. "Thank you for having me," he said in that unmistakable growly voice. "So Clint, tell us about your latest project," Whoopi continued, keeping things light and professional. "What drew you to this particular story?" "Well, it's about second chances," Eastwood replied thoughtfully. "Sometimes people deserve another shot at redemption, even when society has written them off." Sarah Haynes leaned forward with genuine interest. "That's such a beautiful theme. How do you choose which stories to tell at this stage in your incredible career?" "I look for truth," Eastwood answered simply. "Stories that say something real about the human condition. Hollywood's got enough fantasy." The conversation flowed naturally for several minutes, with Eastwood sharing insights about his directing process and working with actors. The studio audience was clearly captivated by his presence and wisdom, but Joy Behar had been unusually quiet, sitting back in her chair with a knowing smile. She had been waiting for her moment, and now she saw it. "Clint, can I ask you something?" Joy interjected, her tone shifting noticeably. "You talk about truth and redemption, but don't you think some of your past comments about certain political figures might contradict that message?" The temperature in the studio seemed to drop several degrees. Whoopi shot Joy a warning glance, but it was too late. Eastwood's eyes narrowed slightly as he turned to face Joy directly. "Which comments would those be, Joy?" "Oh, Joy said with false sweetness. "Your support for politicians who shall remain nameless, but who have made some pretty questionable statements about women and minorities." "I don't recall making any statements that disparaged women or minorities," Eastwood replied evenly, his voice carrying that familiar steel edge that movie audiences knew well. "But by association," Joy pressed on, clearly enjoying herself, "don't you think your political endorsements send a message?" The other hosts exchanged uncomfortable glances. This wasn't the direction anyone had planned for the interview to go. Eastwood leaned back in his chair and fixed Joy with a stare that could have frozen water. "Young lady, I've been in this business since before you were born. I've worked with people of every background, every political persuasion, and I judge them by their character, not their party affiliation." "Young lady," Joy's voice rose an octave. "Excuse me, but I think I have every right to ask tough questions of my guests. And I have every right not to answer gotcha questions from someone who's more interested in creating controversy than having a conversation." Eastwood shot back, his calm demeanor never wavering despite the edge in his voice. Joy's face flushed red. "Gotcha questions. I'm asking about your public statements, Clint. That's called journalism." "Is that what we're calling it now?" Eastwood replied with a slight chuckle that somehow made the insult even more cutting. "In my day, journalism involved research and facts, not fishing expeditions." Whoopi tried to intervene. "Let's maybe get back to talking about your film, Clint." But Joy wasn't backing down. "No, I think this is important. You can't just come on television and expect softball questions when you've made controversial political statements," such as Eastwood's voice remained steady. But his eyes had that dangerous glint that anyone who'd watched his movies would recognize. "Well, there was that whole empty chair thing," Joy said smugly, referring to a political convention appearance from years earlier. "You mean when I used a creative metaphor to make a point about political accountability?" Eastwood replied. "Yeah, I remember that. What about it? Don't you think it was a little, unhinged?" Joy pressed, clearly thinking she had found her angle. The studio audience was dead silent now. Even the crew members had stopped moving, sensing that something significant was happening. Eastwood leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to that whisper-quiet tone that was somehow more intimidating than shouting. "Joy, let me ask you something. How many films have you made? What does that have to do with anything?" Joy shot back defensively. "Just answer the question. How many films have you directed, produced, or starred in? That's not the point. I'm a television host and comedian, right? And how many Academy Awards have you won?" Joy's voice was getting higher. "Again, that's not relevant to this discussion. How about this then?" Eastwood continued, his tone becoming more pointed. "How many careers have you launched? How many young actors have you given their first break? How many stories have you told that actually meant something to people?" "I entertain people every day on this show," Joy replied. But her confidence was clearly shaking. "Do you?" Eastwood asked with genuine curiosity. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you ambush guests and try to create controversy for ratings. Is that your idea of entertainment?" Sarah Haynes jumped in, trying to lighten the mood. "Clint, your films have entertained millions of people around the world. What's been the most rewarding part of your career?" But Eastwood wasn't ready to let Joy off the hook yet. You know what, Sarah, I'll answer that. The most rewarding part has been working with professionals. People who understand that respect is earned, not demanded. People who don't hide behind a panel of hosts to take cheap shots at their guests. Joy's mouth fell open. Cheap shots. I'm asking legitimate questions about your political views. No. Eastwood corrected her. You're trying to create a viral moment for your social media clips. There's a difference between asking about someone's views and trying to ambush them. I'm not ambushing anyone, Joy protested. I'm doing my job. Your job is to interview guests about why they're here, Eastwood replied calmly. I came here to talk about a film I'm proud of, a story about redemption and second chances. You want to talk about politics and create drama. Whoopi made another attempt to steer the conversation. The film does sound fascinating, Clint. Can you tell us about the main character? It's about a man who's made mistakes, Eastwood said, his eyes still locked on Joy. But who's trying to do better? Sometimes the biggest obstacles aren't the ones in front of you, but the people who want to keep you defined by your past instead of letting you grow. The metaphor wasn't lost on anyone in the studio, least of all Joy, who was clearly getting more agitated by the minute. That's a beautiful message, Sarah said, clearly trying to keep things on track. Redemption is such a powerful theme in storytelling, but Joy wasn't about to let the moment pass. Speaking of redemption, don't you think some people are beyond it? I mean, when someone consistently supports divisive politics, at what point do we stop giving them chances? Eastwood's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Are we talking about the character in my film, or are you trying to make this personal again? I'm talking about accountability, Joy replied with false righteousness. Public figures have a responsibility to their fans, do they now? Eastwood's voice carried that dangerous quiet that anyone familiar with his movies would recognize. And what responsibility do television hosts have to their guests? To ask the tough questions that matter. Joy shot back immediately. No, Eastwood said firmly. To treat people with basic human decency. Something you seem to have forgotten. The other hosts exchanged panicked glances. Whoopi was frantically trying to signal the producers, but Joy was too caught up in what she thought was her moment of triumph. Human decency. Joy laughed harshly. That's rich coming from someone who spent decades playing violent characters and glorifying gun culture. The studio audience gasped audibly. Even by The View standards, this was crossing a line. Eastwood sat back in his chair and studied Joy for a long moment, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. You know what your problem is, Joy? Enlighten me, she replied sarcastically. You think being loud makes you right. You think being confrontational makes you brave. But all it really makes you is a bully hiding behind a microphone. Excuse me. Joy's voice reached a pitch that made everyone in the studio wussies. You heard me, Eastwood continued, his voice remaining steady and controlled. You sit here day after day taking shots at people who can't fight back effectively, because they're guests on your show. You think that makes you powerful. But it just makes you small. How dare you call me small? Joy stood up from her chair, her face bright red with rage. I've been doing this job for years. I've interviewed presidents, celebrities, world leaders. And how many of them left here feeling like they'd been treated with respect? Eastwood asked pointedly. How many walked away thinking that was a professional interview? Joy was sputtering now. I don't have to take this from you or anyone else. You're absolutely right, Eastwood agreed calmly. You don't have to take anything from me, just like I don't have to sit here and let you turn what should have been a conversation about art into your personal political theater. Whoopi finally found her voice. Clint, Joy, maybe we should all take a breath here. No, Whoopi, Eastwood said, standing up slowly. I think Joy and I understand each other perfectly now. Joy was practically vibrating with anger. You can't just walk out of an interview because you don't like the questions. Watch me, Eastwood replied with that iconic squint. I came here as a courtesy to talk about something I care about. I didn't come here to be your punching bag for the day. This is live television, Joy protested. You can't just leave, can I? Eastwood asked, already reaching for his microphone. See, that's another thing you don't understand, Joy. Real power isn't about cornering someone on live television. Real power is knowing when to walk away. If you leave now, you'll look like you can't handle tough questions. Joy said desperately, sensing her moment slipping away. Eastwood paused and looked directly into the main camera. Folks watching at home, I came here to talk about a film that means something to me. Instead, I got ambushed by someone more interested in viral clips than actual conversation. That tells you everything you need to know about the state of television today. Then he turned back to Joy. As for handling tough questions, lady, I've been handling tough questions since before you knew what a microphone was. The difference is they were usually asked by professionals. Joy's face was now purple with rage. "You arrogant has been. You think you can just insult me on my own show?" The words hung in the air like a slap. The studio audience was completely silent. The other hosts looked mortified, and even the crew members were staring in shock. Eastwood slowly turned back to face Joy. And for a moment, his expression was exactly like the characters he'd played in dozens of westerns, calm and dangerous, and absolutely done with the situation. "Has been," he repeated quietly. That's interesting coming from someone whose biggest claim to fame is sitting at a table talking about other people's accomplishments. The silence that followed was deafening. You could hear a pin drop in the studio as everyone processed what Joy had just said. Eastwood's expression didn't change, but somehow the air around him seemed to crackle with energy. "Has been," he repeated slowly as if tasting the words. "You know, Joy, in all my years in this business, I've been called a lot of things, but usually by people who had accomplished something themselves." Joy realized she had gone too far, but pride wouldn't let her back down. "I've accomplished plenty. Thank you very much." "Have you?" Eastwood asked, his voice dropping to that whisper that was somehow more terrifying than screaming. "Let's see. You've managed to insult how many guests over the years, created how many controversies, destroyed how many interviews that could have been meaningful conversations." "I asked the questions that need to be asked," Joy replied, but her voice was shaking now. "No," Eastwood corrected her. "You ask the questions that get you attention. There's a difference between journalism and performance art, and you seem to have forgotten which one you're supposed to be doing." Whoopi made one final desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Clint, maybe we can start over. Joy, why don't you apologize and we can get back to discussing the film?" Joy whirled on Whoopi. "Apologize for what?" "For doing my job." "Your job," Eastwood interjected, "is supposed to be entertaining and informing your audience, not attacking your guests for sport." "I wasn't attacking you," Joy protested weakly. Eastwood laughed, and it was not a pleasant sound. "Lady, I've been in actual combat. I know what an attack looks like. The difference is when someone attacked me in the service. At least they had the courage to do it to my face, instead of hiding behind a television show format." The other hosts were now openly staring at Joy with expressions ranging from embarrassment to disgust. Sarah looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. Even the studio audience was shifting uncomfortably in their seats. "You think you're so tough?" Joy said, her voice breaking slightly. "Well, let me tell you something, Mr. Eastwood. This is my house. These are my rules. And if you don't like my questions, you can leave." Eastwood smiled, and it was the coldest smile anyone in that studio had ever seen. "Your house, your rules. You know what, Joy? You're absolutely right. This is your house, and that's exactly the problem." He stood up fully now, towering over the seated panel. "In your house, guests get ambushed. In your house, disagreement means disrespect. In your house, creating drama is more important than creating understanding. Well, congratulations. You've built yourself quite a house there." Joy was practically sputtering. "If you think you can just waltz in here and lecture me about television, you've got another thing coming." "I'm not lecturing you about television," Eastwood replied calmly. "I'm pointing out that what you do isn't television. It's a circus and you're the head clown." The gasp from the audience was audible, even by daytime television standards. This was unprecedented. "How dare you?" Joy shrieked, completely losing any pretense of professionalism. "How dare you come on my show and insult me like this?" "Your show?" Eastwood looked around at the other hosts. "Funny, I thought this was supposed to be a panel show with multiple hosts. Turns out it's just the Joy Behar Ego Hour with some backup singers." Whoopi finally found her backbone. "Clint, that's enough. Joy, you need to calm down right now." But Joy was beyond reason. "Don't tell me to calm down, Whoopi. This man comes in here with his holier-than-thou attitude and thinks he can disrespect me on national television." "The only person who's shown disrespect here," Eastwood said quietly, "is you. From the moment I sat down, you've been looking for a fight instead of having a conversation." "I was doing my job," Joy repeated. But the words sounded hollow now. "No." Eastwood shook his head slowly. "Your job would be asking me about my work, my process, maybe even my opinions on things related to film. Your job would be making your audience feel like they learned something or were entertained by something worthwhile." He gestured toward the cameras. "Instead, you've spent the last 20 minutes trying to embarrass a guest who came here in good faith. And you've succeeded in embarrassing yourself and your show instead." Joy looked around desperately for support, but found none. The other hosts were studiously avoiding her gaze. The audience was clearly on Eastwood's side, and even the crew members were shaking their heads. "Fine," she said finally, her voice cracking. "If you don't want to answer real questions, then maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews." Eastwood was already removing his microphone, but he paused at those words. "Real questions. You want to know what a real question sounds like, Joy? He looked directly into the main camera again. A real question would be, what drives you to keep making films at your age? A real question would be, what advice would you give to young filmmakers? A real question would be, what story are you most proud of telling? Then he turned back to Joy. But those questions require you to actually care about the answers. And we both know you don't. The studio was so quiet, you could hear the camera operators breathing. Joy looked like she wanted to say something else, but for once in her career, she seemed to be at a loss for words. You know what the saddest part of all this is? Eastwood continued, his voice almost gentle now. You had a chance to have a real conversation with someone who's lived through decades of American cinema history. Instead, you chose to play go-to games like an amateur blogger looking for clicks. He finished removing his microphone and set it carefully on the table. That's not just a waste of your time and mine. It's a waste of your audience's time. They deserve better than this performance you've been putting on. Joy finally found her voice again, but it came out as a screech. Don't you dare lecture me about what my audience deserves. I've been connecting with viewers for decades. Have you? Eastwood asked as he straightened his jacket. Or have you just been yelling at them for decades? Because there's a difference between connecting with people and just making noise. The producers were frantically signaling from behind the cameras, clearly trying to figure out how to handle this unprecedented situation. This was live television, and their biggest guest was walking out after completely dismantling one of their hosts. Security, Joy called out desperately. Get security. Eastwood laughed genuinely for the first time since the interview began. Security, what are they going to do? Joy, arrest me for hurting your feelings. He looked around the studio one more time, taking in the stunned faces of everyone present. You know, I've been in this business for over 60 years. I've worked with the best directors, the finest actors, the most professional crews in the world, and in all that time, I've never encountered anyone quite like you. Is that supposed to be a compliment? Joy asked sarcastically, trying desperately to regain some control of the situation. Take it however you want, Eastwood replied. But just remember, when people talk about this interview tomorrow, they're not going to be talking about your tough questions or your journalistic integrity. They're going to be talking about how you completely lost your composure and embarrassed yourself on live television. With that devastating final blow, Clint Eastwood walked calmly toward the studio exit, leaving behind a panel of stunned hosts, a shocked audience, and one completely humiliated Joy Behar, who was still trying to figure out how she had lost control so completely. As the studio doors closed behind him, the cameras captured Joy's face red with rage and embarrassment, while the other hosts sat in stunned silence, knowing they had just witnessed television history, but not the kind anyone would want to be remembered for. So, there you have it, folks. What started as a routine promotional interview turned into one of the most explosive confrontations in daytime television history. Clint Eastwood proved that even in his 90s, he's still the fastest draw in Hollywood. Except this time his weapon was words, not bullets. Make sure to subscribe for more incredible stories like this one. And let me know in the comments, do you think Joy Behar finally met her match?